Oftentimes we fail to understand that when you really look through each and every one of those miracles, as we look at this miracle, is that we fail to miss that on the other side of every impractical thing that God tells us to do is the impossible thing that God is preparing to do. That on the tail end of every impossible thing He's asking you to do, every impractical thing He's asking you to do, is the impossible thing that God is preparing to do. So back to this man. Hey, get up. I know you're blind. I want you to walk through this entire city, mile after mile. And you sit there and think, man, why? Why? That was kind of the first question that kind of came to mind when I'm reading this passage. Like, why? Well, why would you ask this guy to do that? Because this isn't the first blind guy Jesus has healed. He'd healed blind Bartimaeus, without any of this process. He just healed him instantly. Why ask this man, this blind man, to walk through the busy streets of Jerusalem? Well, again, it kind of goes back to that initial response Jesus gave when asked, hey, whose fault is this? Why is this guy the way he is? And again, it was to shine a light. It was to shine a light on the process of how God oftentimes brings about transformation in our lives. And this is no different. See, going back to this journey, you guys sit there and think, how does a blind guy make it all the way through the busy streets of Jerusalem? Streets he's never walked on before, streets he's never navigated before. And again, a journey that, even though there's not a lot of details about it, we can trust was a challenge. We can trust had some hardships. We can trust was not an easy trip to take, but by what it doesn't say in the description. In fact, if you'll notice, what it doesn't say is it doesn't say that Jesus walked right alongside him the whole way. It doesn't say the disciples, carried him from that place to the pool of Siloam. It doesn't say that he pulled up his Uber app on his phone and called for a ride. It doesn't say he had a seeing eye dog. It doesn't say any of that. Listen, the only way that I can imagine how this blind guy can get from one side of the city to the other side of the city is simply this, is one stumble at a time. One stumble, one fall, one mishap, one running into and bouncing off of one wall after the next. Imagine how many people he probably ran into and bumped into on his way from where he was at all the way to this pool of Siloam, the place of his healing. See, it was with a stumble. It was with a stumble. I sit there and I think, man, putting myself in his shoes, like I can't even walk across my room at night, without stumbling and stepping on something, stepping on one of my boys' Legos, or oftentimes I'll run into a piece of furniture and be like, Holly, why'd you move this furniture there? Like, this is a terrible place. She'll be like, it's been there for a whole year, It's like, that's a terrible place for that furniture. And he's blind, and Jesus would send him on a journey that would take some stumbling. And in the process, shine a light on his process of transformation in so many of our lives. Shine a light on a life that would eventually leave an incredible wave, a ripple effect of influence, of shining a light on the very glory of God. And listen, here's why this is important. Here's why I bring this up, is that for some of us, when it comes to living this life of faith, living a life of kingdom impact, some of us, we never make a wave because we're afraid to fall. Some of us, we never start that dream that God has put in your heart, that thing He's been calling you to, He's been leading you to. We never start because we're afraid we'll stumble. When we never step into a relationship with Jesus because we think, oh, what happens if I slip up? What happens if I mess up? What happens if I stumble? But listen, if the story reminds us of anything, if the gospel reminds us of anything, is that the stumble is just a stage. The stumble in your life, or stumbles for that matter, it's just a stage. See, not everybody that walks, in fact, nobody walks eventually without stumbling initially. Think about it. When you think about people, all of us are walking. Nobody walks eventually without stumbling initially. Think of Usain Bolt, fastest man in the world. Listen, there was a point where he was a toddler. There was a point where he stumbled out of the starting gates, right? And listen, here's why this is important for us. If you judge somebody on their season of stumbling, I think you can too often miss the potential in them. I think that's what the disciples did when they saw this guy. They missed the potential in him because they judged him based on his stumble. They judged him based on his condition. They judged him based on what other people had said about his situation. You see somebody stumbling, and if you're not careful, you'll assume and define them by their stumble. But this is not who I am. That's not who you are. It's just a stage. And while I might stumble right now, it doesn't mean I'll always stumble. It's just a stage for right now. So often we stumble. And in that process, sometimes I think if we're not careful, we can even begin to doubt. Again, it wasn't just some random pool he was called to. He was called to a pool called Sent. There was a call in his life. There was a purpose bigger than him that he was being called to. And isn't it true in our lives when we stumble, when we slip up, when it feels like we take one step forward in faith, but only to take two steps backward, we slip up, we fall, we do the same thing, we fall into the same addiction, we fall into the same behavior. It can be easy to sit there and think and begin to doubt and question, man, maybe I was never called to this in the first place. Maybe I was never being sent to this to begin with. Maybe I misheard God. Maybe that wasn't really the dream that he had placed on my heart. But listen, is it possible that you can be stumbling and still be sent? Is it possible that you can be making mistakes and still be anointed? Is it possible that you can be confused and still be called, that you cannot have it all together? Listen, can I tell you, the greatest man or woman of faith, of God, that you've ever met stumbled at some point in their lives. At some point in your life, that Billy Graham figure in your life, at some point in time, they didn't know the first thing how to pray. It's not like Billy Graham came out of the womb, preaching amazing messages, right? It's not like he came out there, oh, Father, bless these people. Bless my mom and my dad who just gave birth to me. It's not like that works that way. At some point, the greatest man or woman of faith that you ever knew, they stumbled at some point. At some point, they came into a church, and when it came to worship, they were YMCAing the whole thing. You know what I mean? At some point, the disciples, talk about stumblers and fumblers, talk about guys that and one mistake and one slip up after the next. Is it possible that you can be stumbling and still be sent? And the truth is, as we're going to come to discover, absolutely. Because every person who's ever walked started with a stumble. And some of you got to be willing to get to the place where you can say, listen, if you see me stumbling, it doesn't mean I'm not sent. It just means I'm in the middle of my miracle. Some of you realize, if you're stumbling and you're struggling and you feel like, man, I gave my life to Jesus. I tried to take a step. I tried to walk in the faith. I just feel like it's one stumble after the next. Listen, don't buy into the lies of the enemy that would sit there and tell you, oh, well, you see, God didn't really do work in your life. God isn't really calling you to something. He hasn't really got to put a dream or a call in your life. No, you got to get to the place where you can sit there and say, no, I know that I'm sent. I know that I'm called. I know God's got a purpose in my life. He's got plans, not for my harm, but for a purpose and good things in store for me. Where next time someone sits there and says, man, and tries to define you by your stumble, you just sit there and say, no, I'm in the middle of my miracle. God is doing something in my life. He's doing a work in my life. When I look at the story of this guy who's making his way to this pool, I also sit there and think, man, how easy it would have been for him to just give up on it. He's got this call. God's called him to this pool called Sent. He's stumbling. He's running into things. The mud's getting mixed with blood. He's getting bruised. It would have been so easy to quit. It would have been so easy to just stop, to simply say, I can't do this anymore. Maybe this wasn't meant for me. Maybe this isn't what I'm called to do necessarily. It would have been easier. It would have been easier. But I love this guy because while it would have been easier, he chose, no, I'm sent. Yeah, it might have been easier. Yeah, it might be easier to just stop. But God has called me to something. God has put a plan in my life. He's put a dream in my life. He's doing a work in my life. Yeah, it would be easier in your life and mine maybe to not start that business. It would be easier not to obey God and step into that ministry. It would be easier not to trust God with your finances. But listen, God didn't call you down the easy path. He didn't call you down the wide road. He called you down a narrow road, a tough road, a road that's going to involve some stumbling. But listen, just because you're stumbling doesn't mean you're not still sent. Just because you failed, it doesn't mean you're not still sent. Just because you're falling doesn't mean you're not still sent, that he doesn't have a purpose, that he doesn't have a plan. If you're willing to just keep going, not give up, not stop midway through, not choose what's easier. My wife and I, we've been in ministry for a number of years now. And I can tell you, it's been a roller coaster ride over the past 2 decades of doing it. And, I remember, especially in the early part of ministry, it was a lot of stumbling. I talk about stumbling and failures and falls. There's a lot of stumbling. The first church I ever pastored was the lead pastor for in Arizona. If you can believe this, was actually a smaller church than this. It was 3 people, and that's including my wife and I. And I remember it was a Sunday morning, and again, we just had one person show up, and so we thought, well, we'll go to IHOP, and so we go to IHOP, and we have breakfast, and we're coming out, and I think Holly was trying to encourage me, but it kind of came off the other side, but she's like, wasn't that the best service ever? That was amazing. Like he's such a nice guy, right? I'm like, that's not a service, that's breakfast at IHOP, Holly. That's not church. And I just remember just feeling so defeated and just struggling. I mean, talk about just stumbles. God would kind of arrange some things. He would open up some doors, open up some opportunities. We would eventually find ourselves where we were pastoring churches of hundreds and then getting the opportunity to speak in front of thousands. And yet, listen, I share that with you to say that listen, when I was first starting out and I was stumbling and I was talking to 3 people, myself included, I can't tell you something, I wasn't any less sent then than I am now. And can't tell you that when I was preaching to much larger crowds than tonight, listen, I wasn't any more sent then than I am now. And the same is in your life as well. So often we can get caught up in the stumble and we can get caught up in the failure. I like what Mike Foster says, don't let the stumble behind you cause you to fail and miss out on the future in front of you. And I love how he phrases that, the stumble behind you, because that's what happens. So often we think of stumbling in the things in front of us, but what happens is oftentimes when we stumble and we fail, rather than getting right back up, even though a righteous man falls 7 times and we choose to get back up, some of us, we get stuck there. We get stuck in that stumble, we get stuck in that failure, and we think, I'm never going to change, I'm never going to see anything different. I must have misread God's call or misread God's plan on my life. Don't get caught up in the stumble. See, the stumble is just a season. Don't let anyone define you by the stumble. Don't let anyone think or make you think that just because you're stumbling, you're not sent. That just because you're stumbling, God doesn't have a great plan still in store for you. And so this blind man, as we kind of start to turn the corner and start to kind of wrap this message up, this blind man, he makes his journey across town. He's stumbling, he's running into things, and again, a mixture of mud and blood and sweat's probably coming down his brow. And of course, as the story goes on, it would say a crowd would gather. Because, listen, people love to watch a good train wreck. People love to gather around and kind of point out and watch a good failure, watch a good mishap, and watch a good stumble. And that's what they're expecting. And so here he is, he's stumbling, he's finding his way. There are probably more than a few people like, see, that's all. This guy's never going to be anything different. See, God, he says that God healed him, God's doing the miraculous, but look at him, he's just stumbling, he's just fumbling, through the city streets. And so he's making this journey, and he finally gets to the Pool of Siloam, which interesting enough, a little tidbit of archaeological I guess trivia. But 2004, they actually found the actual Pool of Siloam. And I used to always think it was just a small ceremonial kind of bathing tub or bathing pool. But it was actually a big pool. It was a massive pool. It was a pool of about 225 square feet. I mean, it was big. With stairs going down to it. So you can just imagine here, again, talk about cannonballing into the water. I mean, here's this blind man with mud on his face and blood and sweat, and he just cannonballs probably right into this water. And it's interesting, as he gets in and out of the water, we find that all of a sudden he can see. All of a sudden he's healed. The miracles happen. Now, oftentimes when we read that, we think, oh, well, it must have happened in the washing. It must have happened with the water. But I kind of wonder if he wasn't healed, not so much in the washing, but in the stumbling. It wasn't healed so much in the washing, but the washing actually just revealed what the walking was healing. That even though he couldn't see it. See, I wonder maybe, just maybe, he was healed from the very moment that Jesus put that mud and put that spit on his eyes. But he couldn't see it in that moment. He couldn't see it in those steps. And listen, there's some of you that right now, that's kind of your life. You're stumbling around. You know God's put a call in your life. He's put a dream in your life. He's wanting to call you. He's leading you. He's calling you to live a life that's greater than yourself, a greater impact than just yourself. And yet you can't see it. Maybe you gave your life to Jesus and you're wondering, like, man, where's the change? Where's the transformation? Because you can't see it. And yet I wonder, maybe, again, the healing wasn't in the washing, it was in the walking. The healing wasn't, in the waters of these special pools of Siloam, but it was in the stumbling. See, because listen, the stumbling and the mud, when mud gets kind of thrown in our eyes and thrown in our face, and we stumble and we fall and things don't go the way we planned, sometimes not only can it keep us from seeing what God is calling us to, but it can keep us and cause us to lose sight of how far we've come from. Like I may not be where I want to be, I may not be where I'm called to be, but thank God I'm not where I used to be. Like we can miss the transformative, changing work that Jesus is doing in our lives. So I've shared this before. Again, when God changes us, when he begins a transforming work in us, it's so much more than just oftentimes this instantaneous thing. Yes, God will heal you. God will do the miraculous. He may even heal you and do the miraculous tonight in your situation. But more often than not, the change he brings about is through a process. And listen, I really believe this. I think the more you walk through that process, the more you hang out with Jesus, the more you show up in places where his people are gathered, you get around Jesus. Listen, you might not change, you might not see the transformation tonight, but I'm telling you, you hang out around Jesus long enough, a week, a month, a year from now, listen, some things are going to change in your life. Some transformation is going to happen in your life. But unfortunately, so often we get blinded to it because we just see the mud and we see the struggle. I was thinking about this, and it reminded me of this movie clip from the movie Moneyball. And Brad Pitt, who's playing the role of Billy Beane, he's put together this team, the Oakland A's, a very unorthodox way, and they go into the playoffs, and he's expecting big things, only for them to ultimately fall and kind of miss the mark. They don't win the whole thing. And he's kind of left, he's having a hard time seeing the value in what he did. He's having a hard time seeing the significance in what he did. And I love his assistant's response. Take a look at this clip here.
The Visalia Oaks and our 240-pound catcher, Jeremy Brown, who, as you know, is scared to run to second base. This was in a game 6 weeks ago. This guy's going to start him off with a fastball. Jeremy's going to take him to deep center. Here's what's really interesting, because Jeremy's going to do what he never does. He's going to go for it. He's going to round first, and he's going to go for it. Okay? This is all of Jeremy's nightmares coming to life.
Oh, they're laughing at him.
And Jeremy's about to find out why. Jeremy's about to realize that the ball went 60 feet over the fence. He hit a home run and didn't even realize it.
How can you not be romantic about baseball?
I love that. See, I wonder if sometimes we get so fixated on the stumble, on the failure, on the mishap, that we lose sight of the miracle and the miraculous that God's doing in our life. How he's changing you, how he's transforming you, how he's molding you, how he's doing a work that maybe you just can't see right in this very moment. But, I also love that clip because I love at the very end there when this baseball player, after he stumbled, he's running back and he's high-fiving everyone, because that's really kind of the picture in my mind when this guy's coming back from the pool of Siloam. Because, see, listen, while he stumbled to the pool, how many of you know he had a swagger coming back? Here he was. He stumbled. He had heard all the taunts. He had heard all the ridicule. He'd heard all the doubt. And now he's coming back, and he's like, I'm healed. I'm whole. And it's kind of interesting what they kind of their immediate response is they ask him when he gets back, basically who are you? Like this can't be the same person that was stumbling, now coming back and walking with the swagger. This can't be the same person who was blind all of a sudden is healed. Hey, who are you? And you just imagine these guys kind of talking amongst themselves, looking at each other like that's Ray Ray. No, that can't be Ray Ray. But no, he does have that same tattoo that he had. It is, and there's this change where the change